Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome tonight to our webinar, Vetting a Lender. We're going to talk about some great strategies, and you guys are in for a treat. I just completed a sale. It was a very difficult sale in October, and a lot had to do with the lender that was selected. So tonight we're going to go over a couple key things to keep in mind, especially if you're working with lenders. It is very, very much a challenging process with all of the backlog, refis, working with a lender, trying to jump through some of the obstacles that you guys are facing. And having the right lender working with you makes all the difference. So, but most of the time you don't get the option of selecting the lender. They come attached with the client or based on the availability. Sometimes you have to work with a newer lender. And so tonight we're going to talk about some of the things that you should consider, or maybe some questions that you should be asking to assist in that process. So a little bit for the experienced brokers tonight, and then also a lot for the newer brokers. So stay tuned, and hopefully you'll get a lot out of tonight's session. Let's go to the next slide. So I'll set it up. So it was a nightmare. So this is a sample of the email threads that came from me to everyone. And again, this was just a couple days before closing. That says, hello, everyone. And when I said hello, everyone, I sent this to the escrow closer, her escrow assistant, the lender, and the lending assistant, just to kind of make sure that we were on track. Because again, we had a closing date of Friday, October 30th. And as many of you know, when I teach the contract class, you're destined for not closing on the last day or a Friday, the last Friday of the month. It's almost, I would say the odds are stacked more against you than in your favor. So with my date, I wanted to test this out to see if I could make that date happen. I was victorious. I did close on Friday on this transaction, but only because I had a really good escrow closer. It did not have anything to do with the lending. In fact, the lending was a nightmare. But on October 28th, 2 days before closing, probably on that that 3 days before closing, you really need to make sure that all of the people that are involved in the purchase and sale agreement are on track. Otherwise, you're looking at having to negotiate extensions. So if you're needing a template, this was a good one that we used. Wanted to check in and see if the documents have been received or if there is an ETA on when the docs will arrive. Great way to just kind of quickly check in. And then I direct it to the escrow team. Escrow team, when is the latest you can receive documents to accommodate the buyer signing and the closing date of October 30th? Please let us know if there are any outstanding items in your list that we can help to accomplish or should have on our radar. Otherwise, we will be on the lookout for signing schedules and combined settlement statement. Thank you for your help to get this file closed. When you're this point in the transaction, you guys, and you're newer to the business, you're like a week before closing, there's not a lot that you can do as the agent except be the communicator, be involved in making sure that all of the T's are crossed and I's are dotted. Because escrow is really bogged down, lenders are very bogged down because of all of the volume of business that's out there. So you as the agent probably need to jump in a bit more at the end in order for you to make those closing dates happen. Even if it's not on the last day of the month, it doesn't matter. There should be some communication that goes out from you to the team or to the lender or to the assistant. There needs to be some communication, and many times there is not. Then the loan assistant actually responded on my October 28th email, and this is what she said. We have received the final loan approval on our end. Can you please confirm the closing time and location? You should anticipate the initial closing package from our closing team tomorrow to start balancing final numbers for Friday. So let's dissect that a little bit tonight, just so you kind of understand. When you receive something, again, there's a loan originator and there's usually a loan assistant or a processor that's usually assigned to that particular file. So when you're working with that guy at the beginning of the contract and you're like, okay, is he pre-approved? We checked all of the credit and did all of that work. The originator is the one that does that, but sometimes they pass along the file to the assistant or to the processor at the very end. And so when I received an email from the loan assistant on October 28th in response to my email, it does appear that they received final approval on their end. But in fact, what I found out later, and I'll have Shannon go to the next slide in a minute, we did not have it approval and documents did not go out as expected on the 29th, causing a complete chaotic nightmare for everybody involved: the lender, the funder, the loan assistant, the closer, the title officer, everybody that was working in, again, trying to work together to get this thing to the finish line on October 30th. So some key things to kind of read through. When you see a final approval and it comes from the loan assistant, you might want to get that from the actual loan originator, or know that they did get a final loan approval. I took it as its word, but here's what we got from the closer on October 29th. She said, I have been emailing the lender off and on all day long. They have been asking me for the settlement statements, which I've provided them 3 times. So at the very end of the closing, you have to work in conjunction with the closer and with title and with the lender and the funder to make sure all of the items are addressed before the parties can sign. And so when you see an email like this from an escrow closer where the lender, they that they're referring to is the lender, has been asking for the settlement statements, which they've provided 3 different times, then they asked the closer, again, this is a local closing company. This is not just some, mobile signer. This is actually the closer that's handling the transaction. When they asked her for the buyer CD, which they don't provide, that is what the lenders provide, not the escrow companies. They're just providing the settlement statements that help balance it out. And then the lender is responsible for the CD. CD, for those of you who are newer, stands for closing disclosure. And you really need to refresh your memory or go and learn more about what a CD really looks like and how that process works. But every lender has to provide a CD and balance out, as I referenced in my email, with the escrow closing team to understand what's the title fees, what's the escrow fees. That's what they're doing when they provide the buyer's CD. So when the lender says, I've received final loan approval, and then I get an email the day after that's like, it's like they're not even on the same page with the CD. I realized really fast, and again, I only have 1 day to pull this off. I realized really fast that we're not in alignment. The team is kind of all over the place. So then on October 30th, finally, after I called, emailed, texted the loan officer, I did get an email from the loan officer said, and this is the day of closing, you guys. At this point, it's very rare that you're even going to close you had to have the CD that went out. So we did find out that the CD did go out in the proper time. There has to be that 3-day period of time for the CD. And we find out, yes, the CD went out, but what they're doing, it says, I am the lending advisor on this file. I know who this guy is. We are working as quick as possible with what we have. And then he says, unfortunately, we do not have everything we need from title and escrow until the beginning of this week. Okay, we're talking about Friday here. This is October 30th. He's saying that Monday that they didn't get what they needed from title and escrow, which was not truthful. As you saw from his assistant, they had loan approval, and there really was no reason why the loan documents could go out. But then he says in this email, unfortunately, we did not have everything we need. And then he says, I think he mistakenly said, thus, escrow made it more difficult, but this was directed to me personally. Thus, you made it more difficult than needed. So I don't know what that is in reference to. Probably a little frustration between the escrow team and the loan officer in balancing their numbers when they're trying to get that CD done at the very end of the escrow, or the very end of the last week of closing. So, and then he throws in also, due to COVID guidelines, we need to obtain a current VOE within a certain time frame of the closing. The client is getting that updated contact info today. So for those of you who are newer, what a VOE stands for is verification of employment. And almost all lenders are requiring a VOE being done. and they usually require the VOE done prior to them issuing loan documents. I don't know what the disconnect was, but I can tell you that it was extremely frustrating because we were working with a bank. We were not working with a local lender on this file. This was, I'll just throw it under the bus a little bit here, but I think you'd have the same experience if you're working with Wells Fargo, Bank of America. This happened to be Chase. But what was unfortunate about the situation is that there was a lot of throwing the escrow officer and lender under the bus. There was a lot of that going on. And here I am, really a neutral party. There's nothing I can do except be the facilitator of the information and help guide my client through this process. And again, thank goodness I had a good escrow closer who worked after hours on the 29th to kind of queue up the closing and making sure that we had things ready to go for the closing on the 30th. But we didn't get loan documents, you guys, until October 30th at like 11:30. And we were jumping through all kinds of hoops to make that same day funding closing experience happen. So I guess the moral of the story is I would not recommend closing on the last day of the month, especially if it was the last Friday of the month. The service can be very disjointed. It can be very hectic. I had to basically clear up my whole afternoon to handle this matter. And so that does not lead for a very good experience for the consumer. It was a lot of frustrating phone calls and emails and text messages between escrow, loan officer. And the other moral of the story is try, if you can, to get the client to utilize a local lender who understands our lingo, understands when CDs have to be provided. And you're just like, you're up against the wall. There's not a lot you can do except to try to build relationships and have those good people working around you, those local people. And again, CW did a great job of pulling out the stops and getting the signing to happen and the same day funding and really championing this to the close. And the lending was a complete nightmare. So just a heads up, watch out for those out-of-state lenders, people that give you weird information. There were some cues along the way, but who would have thought when you got something from the loan assistant that sounds like loan approval had taken place? I could have probably prompted some more conversation on the 28th when I received that from her, the 29th. But again, you really should be working with that loan officer, and some of these terminology becomes really relevant when you're actually doing your files or your closings yourself. So kind of some things to keep in mind. Let's go to the next slide. So when you start asking yourself, well, how do I vet a lender? What kind of language, what kind of questions should I be asking that lender? And I had one of our top producers actually put this together. So this is very relevant. It's fresh off the press in the last 30 to 60 days. And she went ahead and kind of bullet pointed out at some of the questions that she asks to properly vet a lender. So, I mean, if you're going to sit down and you had an experience like I had, you're like, oh my gosh, never again. I don't want to work with a lender that doesn't communicate well, maybe doesn't have gouged my client in the past, can never make a closing date. If you're having those types of situations happen to you as a real estate agent, you got to get yourself a better lender. And so these are some questions that you may ask if you're a buyer's agent shopping around to try to find a better lender partner, or if you're a listing agent trying to vet that lender, or maybe you're trying to decide between two really outstanding offers. They're both financed. One lender is with one company, the other is with another company, and you're trying to vet that lender and trying to figure out which would be the better lender to work with, or which client, as a seller selecting which offer to work with. Maybe they want to go with this offer, which is the same price, same closing costs that they're contributing, over another lender, just because of the simple fact that they'll have an easier time working with that lender to get to the finish line. Less hassles, which means they'll close quickly or timely and have a successful experience. So the first one is ask them about their company. Yeah, you should know about their company. If you're looking at a lender letter, and I'll show you a couple, and you've never worked with that company in the past, there's nothing wrong with asking about their company. I've never worked with a company, say ABC Mortgage. I've never worked with ABC Mortgage. Can you tell me more about your company? Are they local? Have an understanding about their company, or have them explain that to you on the phone when they call you. Are they a direct to Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac seller servicer? Great question. For those of you that are newer, you might want to familiarize FNMA. Again, another lingo is Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. They abbreviate that sometimes. So again, that might be a quiz question at some point in time. Are they direct to Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac? Again, a government-backed servicer. That's sometimes a good, if you have an understanding that they do that, then you have understanding of their kind of their overlays or how they structure their loans. There's nothing wrong with asking how long have they been in the business. Point blank, ask them that, especially if you're going to want to partner with them. I ask that with anybody I'm going to partner with. I need to be on the same page. And if somebody's brand new to the business, 2-3 years, unfortunately, that's not somebody that I want to align myself with, because I'm experienced and I've been working in the business for over 20 years now. And I need to have somebody that's well matched, that can have that type of experience level. Unless the lender is outstanding and has a proven track record, I need to have the experience level be at least or more than my experience level in the business. That would be a better partner for me. Do they have an automated approval? If they have a system like that, or do they do they hand do their approvals? That can sometimes be a sign. If they have an automated approval system, then they're using a back-end technology platform to run a scenario through their automated system to get an automated approval. That's a great question to ask as well. Did you receive a property inspection waiver? If somebody's putting 20% down on the appraisal, there's no harm in asking the lender, especially if you're looking at a pre-approval letter from one over another, did you receive a property inspection waiver, appraisal waiver? That is sometimes good. It's kind of confusing because you're asking the lender that question. It's not like we're having them do an inspection, but they call it in their system when an appraisal is being done. They actually call it an inspection sometimes, or an appraisal waiver, one or the other. So, that would be something to ask that lender, especially if you're vetting them between one or of another. Say you had 2 lenders call me, Rochelle, which one do you think would be better? Well, shoot, if I get a lender that's putting, a client who's putting 20% down, and we've got them they're going to do an appraisal waiver, shoot, I'll go with that one over the other one where I can't even get a hold of the lender to even have a conversation. It would be a lot better to work with somebody like that, that's working with us instead of against us, or hard to get a hold of, or those types of situations. Do you do manual underwrites, in case they lose the automatic underwriting approval through that process? Do they do manual overrides or underwrites? Some of those types of questions could be asked as well. Again, very advanced. Like I said earlier at the call, I told you guys, some of you will get some of you have been experienced in the business. This is irrelevant to your business now. Again, this comes from a top producer for Best Choice. Where do you do your underwriting? Locally or regionally? Love that. In my case, with the scenario we talked about at the beginning, they did their underwriting in Chicago, and then their funding was done on the East Coast in New York City with Chase. And then the originator, happened to be right here in Seattle. So it was completely disjointed. We had to work with 3 different areas of the country, and it was extremely challenging. And luckily we closed on the 30th, but everything had to be stacked up, perfect alignment for that to happen. And I guess I got a little bit of luck and a really good closer that helped us get to the finish line, and a client who was able to jump out of work and go sign papers at the last minute and move money around from his bank. So again, there's a lot of things that had to align, but if you know that they're underwriting locally rather than regionally, tends to be a better experience for the client. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have a better situation. Go back one more step, Shannon. Sorry. Yep. Tell me the right sided would be typical questions that a newer broker may ask. The left side is more of the experienced broker, but tell me how a typical loan goes through your system. There's nothing wrong with a new broker asking that. If you're a new listing agent and you're trying to vet a lender, what is your typical loan turn times? Is another question in that same vein of thought. Do you routinely do closing disclosures without the loan being cleared to close? Again, CDs being sent out. Some lenders will, again, closing disclosures. Again, they say CD a lot. You kind of need to understand that's what they're meaning by that. Do you do those CDs without the loan being cleared to close? In this case, I was trying to determine that the day before closing, which actually should have been done a week prior, or knowing that the lender is doing that. Do you do same day fund and sign? In this case with Chase, they did. In this particular loan, they did. But you know what? Why don't you know that before, especially not a day or two before closing? Maybe somewhere in the middle or the beginning of the process would have been better to know that. At this point in time, do you have all income and asset documents? This is a question you should be asking at the very beginning, probably in that area where you would, if you're the listing agent, in that after that 10 days of being underwritten and kind of collecting all the documentation, at this point in time, do you have all the income and asset documentation? What do you miss? What are you missing? So we can have a complete file. That's a great question. It's not like we're having to collect that information, but if you have a communication or dialogue with the lender with some of this stuff, you'll be able to head some challenges earlier on, so you can maybe change lenders if you need to. If you wait until the week before closing, some of this stuff you're not able to navigate or point to your client in the right direction, and they sometimes get stuck with that lender that they're not happy with, and they have a very bad experience, which is a reflection on you. Don't think that they don't think about you as well when they think about that lender. For me, the lender was selected by my client. Chase Bank we actually double apped, and he was able to get a better rate because it was a jumbo loan with my earlier scenario. But he ended up, when we got to the closing and things were kind of unraveling very quickly, my client was the one that said, "Sorry, Rochelle, I'm so sorry we went with an out-of-state lender. I should have listened to you." Those types of experiences, you don't want them to think that you've given them a name and a phone number of an out-of-state lender or somebody that does not get to the finish line. You don't want your client to go, "You gave me that referral, that lender," and then they start blaming you, which makes it even more challenging of a file. How do you update me throughout the loan process? Another very good question to ask at the beginning or the onset of the transaction. And do you have any reservations about this file closing on time? That question can be asked at any point in that transaction. So again, hopefully these questions will kind of spark you into being more conversational with that lender. We should not be having conversations a day or two before closing. We should be having conversations throughout the transaction. Another great thing you want to bookmark tonight. This has saved me so much time and effort, and you might want to do this tonight and test your preferred lender. At Best Choice Realty, I don't say you have to use this lender. I could make a lot more money as a firm owner if I mandated that, but I've chosen to let you have choice. And as much as I have a preferred relationship with Sam Sentioli, you can go to it's kind of weird because it's like you're used to NWMLS. So you're looking for nmlsconsumeraccess.org. That is the site. And this is a nationwide system that allows you to check and vet a lender, any lender that's licensed. They all have to, they're required by law. In 2008, things changed drastically. And this consumer access link became essential to real estate brokers or consumers looking to vet their lender. So let's put Sam Sentioli in there. And again, any part of their name should come up. So if they go by a different name, it should come up. So Sam actually has a legal name. It's going to say the terms and conditions. Yeah, go ahead and agree to that. So I'm gonna have Shannon, I want her to go through this tonight with you guys. So it's going to say that we're not a robot basically there. And then, one match was found. So he does have a legal name of Samuel Joseph Sentioli. So Sam is what his trade name, I guess, would be. And it will say right here below his name, if there's any regulatory actions against your lender, kind of would be important to know, especially if you're recommending a particular guy and it's not Sam. Sam has nothing posted of regulatory, but it does show the amount of time, where he was located, what companies he worked for. And so to make sure that it checks out, we don't want a liar, definitely don't want a liar or somebody that's deceiving our clients. They tell you one thing and then you find out, he didn't work at Greystone or he didn't work at Security National. I've worked with Sam since he was at Security National. So I have been with Sam since 2015. I've worked with him and he has been a very good loan originator and a branch manager and has had many experiences in his life that have not been detrimental to our clients and our consumers. So this is a clean one. I don't want to show you ones that are bad, but I have run into some bad ones. And you want to look at their employment history and you want to look to see if there's any regulatory actions And just to make sure it checks out, because again, this is public record, and make sure that he is licensed, and make sure that he, if he does say he's a branch manager, it checks out. And
also, which state they're licensed in, right?
Yes, correct. So if things don't add up, this is the place to go to check all that out. Very good, Chan. Let's go to the next slide. So again, consumer access, if you need to write it down, you'll have to probably get it on the recording, or Shannon can put it in the chat. Example number 1. So I told you guys I'd share with you some pre-approval or pre-qual letters. I think what happens in the lending industry, and again, I'm not a lender, never want to be a lender, but what happens is there's terminology that sometimes gets thrown around. So one of the things that, as a real estate broker, you want to think about when you're looking at pre-approval letters and trying to vet them, like, or you get a pre-approval letter or a pre-qual letter from your client, and you're like, this doesn't make sense. Pre-qualification letter, some older lenders interchangeably use pre-qualification letter along with pre-approval letter. At the end of the day, in my opinion, I have to read the letter to see and to be able to vet, is this a pre-approval or a pre-qual? Pre-quals is usually very preliminary in the way I was taught. But because lenders are being taught and they have different experience levels, I find that a lot of the newer ones kind of use it interchangeably. So again, you just want to read the letter and just understand. And this is one where it's definitely a pre-qualification letter. It is early on. And I would go, oh my gosh, did this really happen? And the answer is yes. I actually pulled this from my own email account, and I changed the name so that you guys wouldn't see it, but it was on a Word document, literally a Word document, not a PDF. Again, very concerning. The date and the name, at least the MLS number was on. I changed it so you guys wouldn't know who the lender was. Again, on the bad boy or bad girl list that we just saw before, but that number was there. So they're required by law to put their NMLS number on their letters, which makes you want to go into the consumer access and look them up. So I did, but it was on a Word document, but you can see it says pre-qualification. There was no letterhead on the top. And it says, I reviewed the qualifying information. Okay, so then there's a name and a phone number that's associated with my client. Again, I'm going to go take them out and look at homes this weekend. And she says, I have reviewed the qualifying information provided to me below for the reference applicant. And based on the information, we are processing a purchase transaction. Okay, great. So at least it's not going to be a refinance. We know it's a purchase, not a refi. Okay, so that's good. We know that the borrower's names, that kind of checks out because that's who I'm working with, Stephen and Tracy. Again, we changed the name so you guys would not know who these people were. Sales price was 800. Loan type, she put on their conventional. Credit score, 800. But in the pre-qualification letter, there was no mention of that they checked the credit to verify the credit. It just talks about the base of the review included an analysis of the source, the nature, the stability, the income, the amount of cash or assets available for closing. So maybe the client provided bank statement, but the credit was not checked. It doesn't say that here. The opinion is based on preliminary information, is subject to validation of the information, subject to an appraisal, the title. All of those are typical things that they put in the pre-approval letter. But I would want to make sure that your client's credit has been checked, that if they use words like underwriting approval, things of that nature, that would be, but this is a red flag pre-qual letter that I would bring to your attention, because these things fly around and you're thinking, oh, my client's already pre-approved. This is awesome. And when in fact, this was a credit score that literally the client called this lender, and I found out they just said, hey, I've had my credit score checked and it was 800. And this Kathy basically said, okay, no problem. Let me write this up and get you over a pre-approval for your realtor. It's like, oh my goodness, this is still happening even in today's day. So kind of be on the lookout. Here's another one I want to show you. This is typical, the money store. I've never worked with the money store. So again, I will probably want to call this Lori Lynn, not to say that this is a bad pre-approval letter. I just never have worked with the money store. And so I'm not really familiar. May want to check out the NMLS number and look her up and see what, if she checks out. But again, loan amounts on there, primary residence on there, property address to be determined in Auburn. It has bullet points. Typical pre-approval letters will have bullet points. So again, not saying this is a bad pre-approval letter, but again, I have not worked with the money store and I've not worked with Lori Lynn. So I probably want to vet that lender, or at least ask some questions with that lender before I accept that pre-approval letter and get into a contract where I have a 30-day financing contingency and find out later that we've got major issues. This is an example of Sam's at Movement Mortgage. Congratulations, that's my client. Again, this was my double application. He made an application with Chase Bank because that's who he banks with. This was a jumbo situation. And we compared it with Sam, and Sam advised him and gave him a good faith, kind of an estimate of the loan origination and all of the fees. And when it came down to it, Sam said, you know what, your better deal is to go with Chase. But if something doesn't work out, or if you're unhappy with the service you get from your bank, I'll be happy to step in, and we've already got you apped and ready to go. So it will be a very quick and easy file. But this is his pre-approval letter. I'm thrilled to let you know that you have been issued a pre-approval. And then they actually have like a kind of a underwritten page that they put on their second page. At Movement, they do that. They send the CD out early. They underwrite, so they collect all the documentation. And when you get something from Movement, it's a pretty solid pre-approval, and they make it based on credit underwriting, and underwriter looks at the file, all of that type of thing. The only thing I would say on this one, if I got a pre-approval letter and I was a listing agent and I say I had those 3 to look at, I would want to go back, especially if this one came with an offer that we wanted to accept, and ask that lender, when the lender calls me or when I call the lender, hey, would you be open to getting me an updated pre-approval letter with the specific address? If they say no problem, then I want to ask them about, this was a condo, right? Did the client provide you with the homeowner dues? Here's the correct tax information. Let's make sure that we underwrite it with this information so that we can get a clear underwritten approval within a short window of time. And this happens because I know that the loan type's there and I have the TBD, to be determined, on the address. If a lender has done all the work that they have initially, collect all the information, run it through their desktop underwriting, did all the things we talked about earlier, there's no reason why they couldn't within 24 hours get you an updated pre-approval letter if you're the listing agent trying to determine that this is the offer that we want to go with. So you can certainly ask for that from that proposed lender. Next slide. I think we're wrapping up on time. Perfect. This is an example of a loan estimate. So any of your clients, again, with 2008, there was a lot of changes that were made, a lot of transparency, but I think still consumers don't realize how much transparency and how much ability they have to shop for the right loan. When they're buying something, they also have the ability to shop. So there's nothing wrong with them in the very beginning, before they start looking at homes, to shop loans or shop scenarios. I wouldn't do more than 2 or 3. There's no need for that to create a bog down in the system. But in my case, it was important for my client to take a look at what their bank offered and compare it to what Movement Mortgage offered. And this was the loan fees. And they should be able to compare apples to apples to understand what is their monthly payment, how much is the real estate taxes, what is the appraisal fees, what are all the fees that are associated with doing the loan. And if you don't have this and your client's out shopping for a property, you're doing your client a disservice, because you don't even know how to negotiate their fees or their closing costs. What if they don't have the $7,560? Then you're using estimates, and that doesn't become good negotiations when you're talking with that other client, or you're having to tack some of the closing costs to the top. If you're not doing a conventional 20% down loan and you need some help from the seller, or you need to increase the sales price to cover your closing costs, you need to know your numbers. In order to know your numbers, you've got to work with your client's lender to get an estimate or approximate cost of all the closing fees, so that you can properly negotiate for your client and know what their monthly payment would be looking like. Sometimes that's very important to your clients. And when you have, again, I don't have to know how those fees come up. I can work with any lender that my client works with because I know the questions to ask. But that's what you're looking for, is a loan estimate. If you're wanting to shop, your client would need to get a loan estimate, and then you compare. And in my case, the bank, which was a jumbo loan, happened to be, I think, a half a point less than movement, but there was a lot of factors at play. And so, movement can usually beat anybody's rate and the closing estimates. And so with this particular situation, it happened to be that we had to go with Chase. But at any point in time, if Chase would have dropped the ball or my client wasn't able to do the deal, movement was ready to go at a moment's notice to make that happen. Let's go to the next slide. So this is what I'll end with tonight, you guys, but there are some forms that you need to be familiar with if you want to hold the lenders accountable. And for those of you who are listing agents on this call, you need to familiarize yourself with 22AL, which is the request for loan information. That is for listing agents to hold the lenders accountable. Now, even if you send over the 22AL and then they send back the 22AP, again, buyer's agents need to be prepared to submit the 22AP when you receive the 22AL. Even though you've gone through this song and dance or this little step, does not mean that you shouldn't at some point ask that buyer to waive their financing contingency by using the 22AR listing agents. I'm talking to listing agents. Many of you wait until like the day of closing to hold those lenders accountable. And we could have had that conversation a little bit earlier. But again, the first step would be, let's start sending those 22ALs listing agents a little bit more frequently. Then we can start to see what is provided, what still needs to be gathered, and again, hold them more accountable throughout that process. That gives the buyer's agent an opportunity, if the loan information can't be filled out on day 10 or 11, maybe we need to go a different direction with a different lender who can provide us with this information and do it more urgently and in more time. I talked with my brother-in-law. He's still waiting for his refi. It's 2 months. So again, it's bogged down in the system. We don't want to be working with lenders that are doing more refis than more purchases. I'm starting to see a rise of that happen as well. So make sure your preferred lender is doing purchases and prioritizing purchases over refis so that you don't have problems down the road. I think that's all I had, Shannon. Was there any other questions or things that I missed?
No, but if other people have questions or situations that they're working with right now, they have questions about, feel free to unmute your line. We can take those now if you'd like.
If not, jump off and we'll talk to you guys next week. Good to see you all.
Okay, I can't go yet.
I
had a listing, a buyer's agent tell me one time, I have never been requested to provide a loan information. And I said, well, first time for everything. But she literally expected not to have to do it.
Yeah, I know. I'm getting some
It's
resistance.
fault, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's right in the 22A. So if you're using a financing 22A contingency, then yeah, that's in play. That has not been removed, and that's not something new. It's been going on for a few years now that they added that provision.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's a first time for everything.
You're protecting your seller, really. I mean, the seller doesn't have many opportunities to request information like that. And I mean, if they're going to move forward with the loan, they have the right to know where the loan is at. So yeah.
We're seeing more, Emily, in the last, I would say, since COVID happened. We're seeing a lot of agents from other companies now being trained by their designated brokers a bit more to utilize those forms. So we're actually seeing a rise in that. So if you want to say in the last, since COVID, we're seeing a rise in those because there's so many, they're doing VOEs, like literally on the day of closing again. They're doing sometimes 2 or 3 VOEs. And so it's better to know what's been collected and to know that things are on track. And that's the best way you can do it as a listing agent in our state.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep, you bet. Yep, there's resistance out there for sure. Okay, any other questions?
I think that's it. So we'll see you guys all next week. Did we have other trainings this week, Rochelle?
It's on our calendar. McFerrin's offering something, and then core, if you have our commercial, they have a Friday core class for SEBA that looked really good. Other than that, we'll see you guys next Monday for our session on Monday night.
All right, bye guys.
See you later.